Сейчас с новостями.
Подведем итоги сегодняшнего дня.
TV-Rain, Дождь. The only Russia's independent network.
We are not allowed to work in our country anymore.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk to you.
It's a real war.
Maybe there are some negotiations about that.
There will be very serious consequences.
TV Rain Newsroom presents Russia Tomorrow.
A new federal government structure is being established to coordinate, manage and mobilize the Russian economy in a national war effort to equip, train and prepare soldiers for the war in Ukraine. Every day, TV Rain broadcasts to millions of unique viewers in Russian, and once a week, we collect the top stories from inside the country and share them in English for an international audience. I am Mikhail Fishman, and this is Russia Tomorrow. Russia's Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin is heading up a new federal coordinating council to mobilize Russia's economy around Putin's war in Ukraine. Defense Minister Sergey Shoigu called his counterparts across the world to warn them that Ukraine was going to bomb itself with loose radioactive material. Russian military officers with backgrounds in IT are behind the targeting and deployment of cruise missiles that kill Ukrainian civilians and destroy non-military targets. A top Russian propagandist calls for Ukrainian children to be killed and is swiftly punished for crossing Putin's rhetorical red line. Russia's Prime Minister has spent the past 8 months mostly absent from public appearances and official statements, out of the spotlight and seeming to avoid any contact with the war. But this week, Mikhail Mishustin came back into full view as he took control of a new coordination council in the Russian government, tasked by President Putin to establish control over regional efforts to equip and prepare the Russian army.
Определение целевых заданий по поставкам вооружений, техники.
Determining targets for the supply of armaments and equipment, financing and budgeting, determining prices, selection of suppliers and contractors, and the creation of specialized infrastructure. The head of state approved the composition of the council, which included my deputies in charge of the relevant areas, the heads of law enforcement agencies, and business and economic leaders.
This all seems to suggest a comparison with Stalin's State Defense Committee, created in the summer of 1941. Vladimir Putin's creation of his own coordinating council is just one more step towards a full military mobilization of the country. Following on the heels of the first nationwide mobilization of soldiers since 1941, now the country's economy is being mobilized. A people's war, as government officials and propagandists now call it, requires drastic steps. In fact, the mobilization of conscripts and creation of a coordinating council all serve just one purpose: to reinforce the front lines. As foreign affairs expert Vladimir Frolov has said, counting on anything else would be impossible.
The entire civil economic emergency recently introduced by the Kremlin is likewise aimed at supplying material to the strategic defense of occupied lines, but not total war until a victorious end. Economic and human mobilization create the possibility of extending the sluggish special military operation until 2023, but fail in the meantime to allow for a reliance on anything more.
The Russian army has been decimated and Ukraine's forces continue to advance. And the Kremlin urgently needs to equip, train and deploy hundreds of thousands of conscripts to the front lines. The first wave of mobilization was carried out as an emergency with raids and dragnets, and conscripts are obliged to purchase their own protective equipment, and they are dying at the battlefield in body armor bought with their own money. In September, images went viral of how freshly conscripted soldiers told their wives to pack the first aid kits from their automobiles with cheap tampons so that they would have something to stop the bleeding from bullet wounds. Within 10 to 12 days, many of these men turned up on the front lines in the heat of battle, with no preparation or instruction, and soon after that, their families began receiving notifications of their deaths. Here in this video clip, made by newly arrived recruits at an army unit on October 8, they talk about having to take loans just to buy themselves ammunition, and that many of them have yet to be able to activate payment cards and receive salaries, and that weapons given to them are rusty and broken. As you can clearly see, every one of them is wearing whatever he can.
We oppose only the fact that our commanders, operators of combat vehicles, gunners, and all sorts of other specialized personnel did not undergo proper training. Some haven't seen the vehicle they're supposed to operate and don't even know how it functions or how to start it.
As explained by the news outlet Mediazona, just one day after these images were filmed, the men were already at the battlefield in the Lugansk region of eastern Ukraine. Many of them would die within the following 2 weeks. And judging by available sources, this is just a typical picture of the current state of the emergency mobilization. As Ukraine's military intelligence has confirmed, Iran is sending to Russia not only its drones, but body armor and helmets as well. It is under these conditions that Putin has activated the government and created the Coordinating Council.
The Army and Navy, all our soldiers on the front lines, in the rear units, and at the firing ranges must be equipped with everything they need in the shortest possible time. Russia tomorrow.
Last weekend, Russia's Minister of Defense, Sergey Shoigu, was so concerned about the consequences of an alleged dirty bomb plot by Ukrainians to frame Russia for using a small tactical nuclear device that he picked up the phone and called his counterparts in 4 NATO member countries: Turkey, France, Great Britain, and America. Shoigu's concerns were accompanied by unsourced claims by Russian state media that 2 Ukrainian organizations were ordered by Kiev to prepare to use this dirty bomb on their own territory in order to accuse Russia of detonating a low-yield tactical weapon and thus damage Russia's international standing. In response, London, Paris, and Washington put out a joint statement and rejected Russia's transparently false allegations that Ukraine is preparing to use a dirty bomb on its own territory. Russia's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergey Lavrov, at the beginning of the week echoed anonymous and non-specific allegations.
У нас есть информация, конкретная информация относительно тех.
We have information, specific information about those scientific institutions in Ukraine, the scientific institutions that have the technology capable of building this dirty bomb. We have information that we've verified through the appropriate channels that this isn't an unfounded suspicion, that there are real reasons to believe that such actions could be being planned. Together with some of his confidants, Sergey Shoigu agreed to hold additional consultations on this subject at a professional level.
Neither Lavrov nor the Minister of Defense offered any real evidence as proof of the plot. At the same time, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Shoigu was just carrying a message for Putin.
Там, де і куди приходить Росія.
Wherever Russia goes, it leaves behind mass graves, torture sites, ruined towns and villages, ground full of landmines, destroyed infrastructure, and environmental catastrophe. And out of everyone, there is only one person capable of nuclear weapons in our part of Europe. And it is that person who told Comrade Shoigu who to call. If Russia is preparing to raise the stakes again and to escalate the war again, it will be shown that now the world isn't willing to accept us again, even before they try any other dirty tricks.
A dirty bomb is not a nuclear device, nor can it be considered as dangerous and deadly as a conventional nuclear warhead. Instead, a dirty bomb is a theoretical mixture of conventional explosives and loose radioactive material, for instance, from medical or industrial applications, both of which are less tightly controlled. A dirty bomb can be detonated to irradiate and poison an area of terrain and turn it into a zone of acute radioactive danger. As a result, Western allies of Ukraine have dismissed all Russia's claims that the Ukrainian government is preparing to detonate a dirty bomb. Not only is Moscow unable to provide any proof of its claims, it just doesn't make any sense. Why would Kyiv dare to go for such an attack? Not only would it bring no substantial advantage on the battlefield, neither would it be of any political profit. And Ukraine's military is advancing, claiming new territory with every week. The more Moscow spreads its accusations, the more it looks like a psychological attack aimed at the domestic audience or the international community, or both, and designed to scare the world at the moment when the Russian military will most probably have to retreat from Kherson, a strategic city in the south of Ukraine, captured by Russian forces. And now for more on dirty bombs and nuclear threats, I'm turning to the Moscow Times journalist Mikhail Overchenko. Mikhail, hello, and thank you for joining me here in the studio in Amsterdam. Mikhail, We see that Moscow is clearly escalating with this issue, now with Vladimir Putin personally backing up these allegations that Moscow was issuing for all last days. And now Vladimir Putin personally claims that, yes, Kyiv has these plans for provocations with this dirty bomb. What he's doing, what is his goal?
I would like to highlight two things. First, Moscow is now trying to deploy all the arsenal of actions and words because it cannot do anything on the battlefront. So I would like to draw a comparison with what Ukrainians did before their counteroffensive in Kharkiv region. So they used precision missiles to hit Russian supply lines, command posts, ammunition depots, and so they used all their arsenal to weaken its opponent, and then through the holes in Russian defense, troops went into the offensive. So Russia cannot do anything of this on the battlefront. And it tries to deploy all the means from strategic nuclear weapon to, we now come, dirty bomb, and also allegations in using biological weapon. Probably, if you remember,
which Putin also stressed, actually.
Yes.
Again.
In the beginning of the war, Russia claimed that United States and Ukraine developed biological weapon in secret laboratories in Ukraine. And now this week, Russia asked Security Council of the United Nations to form a commission to investigate these claims. So we also, this week, Russia staged a nuclear maneuver, which it didn't do for 3 years, for the last 3 years. And so we have strategic nuclear threat, tactical nuclear threats, which the Kremlin continue to repeat. We have dirty bomb, we have biological weapon. So all the arsenal that you can imagine, and also massive strikes. I would add here massive strikes with drones and missiles on the Ukrainian infrastructure and civilian objects.
Right, but when it comes to this shelling campaign, which Russian military started in recent weeks, shelling Ukrainian cities with bombs and drones, it looks clear. I mean, no matter how cruel it is and brutal, it's still, the idea is to make Ukrainians to succumb to the pressure and to probably agree to come to terms with Moscow on what's going on the battlefield. But when we're talking about this dirty bomb, which makes little military or political sense, when we come to a nuclear threat, it's just words. It's nothing but, I mean, it's not backed by any evidence, and basically every allegation that Sergey Shoigu or whoever from Moscow came up with being refused by whoever agent from on the West.
Military analysts and politicians claimed in recent days that probably Russia uses as a pretext to its own operation.
As a false flag, exactly.
Yes,
That's exactly, yes.
Yes, and because it usually used such kind of approach in Syria, for example, and also it accused the West and Ukraine that they want to attack Russia, and that is why Moscow launched this invasion of Ukraine.
Right.
So this is kind of
so there is
the same thing.
There is a huge concern that probably this is a false flag operation, and Moscow itself is planning some kind of incident.
Yes, I would express some doubt in this. And here I would like to highlight the second issue that I mentioned in the beginning. The Kremlin masterfully can distract attention. So even if we recollect the recent annexation of Ukrainian territories, it was done immediately after it suffers huge defeat in the northeast of Ukraine. And instead of discussing this military defeat, everybody began to discuss annexations. So maybe we or experts should think of Moscow preparing something in quite different field, in quite different sphere. Maybe they should look into another corner and not to pour all the attention into this dirty bomb discussion.
So it's not a necessary sign of Moscow's itself preparing some kind of provocation with some amount of nuclear material, whatever it might be, but it could be just a PR stunt for something else.
Yes, we all know that Moscow has wonderful PR, awful wonderful PR, because with propaganda and all its forces. Probably, yeah, we should look into something else, or at least think about it.
So you don't think we should be afraid of a dirty bomb being used in near future somewhere around Kherson, Nova Kakhovka, or this area?
It is difficult to discuss whether we should be afraid or not, because this is the first time when a country which possesses nuclear weapon threatens to use it, right? And obviously everybody is afraid or is thinking about it. So probably we should be afraid of dirty bomb. But I would like to recollect the story with biological weapon. So it led to nowhere. So all the claims, if it could be considered a false flag operation in the beginning of the war, nothing happened neither from Ukrainian, from Russia, from Russian side.
Right.
So.
Right. Okay. And yet Vladimir Putin keeps repeating it and keeps bringing it to the table. You mentioned the strategic nuclear exercise that Moscow started this week, and as we understand, it was supposed demonstrated as some kind of routine because Moscow has warned Washington of this exercise.
Yes, and, they usually do it. Yeah.
Yes, as they always did it before, but nothing is business as usual anymore, as we clearly understand, and we already know that President Biden repeated his concern about nuclear threats coming from Moscow, and again stressed that it would be a huge mistake if Moscow would turn to nuclear weapon. So, do you think there is something serious? I mean, do you think that Vladimir Putin is heading towards using it?
What we have seen until recently, he is going to use all kinds of threats that he can, right? And with his defeats on the battlefield, he uses more threats and more threats. As a former Allied NATO commander Wesley Clark mentioned in the interview with CNN these days, he said, we really do not know why Putin is doing it. So, yeah, we really do not know. But we can see throughout whole conflict that he is escalating and escalating and escalating. What can be the next step? Could we imagine any? So strategic nuclear weapon is already could be seen as the highest one, but they degraded to dirty bomb from nuclear weapon just to dirty bomb. Maybe there will be some claims about chemical weapon next. So,
well, let's see. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Russia tomorrow.
Anton Krasovsky, head of the Russian language affiliate of RT and one of Russia's most influential and famous propagandists, has found himself in hot water after he called for Ukrainian children to be drowned and incinerated.
Была детская больница, лечили астму. И вот там мне украинские дети, они рассказывали про то, что Украина оккупирована москалями, что если бы не москали, они бы жили как во Франции, а вот они страдают, потому что оккупированы. Причем это были не украинские дети, которые украинцы говорят по-украински. Такие там тоже были, они были совершенно нормальные.
Какие? Откуда были эти дети?
Это были совершенно русскоязычные, с русскими фамилиями пацаны, которые... У кого-то там отец был военный, у кого-то кто-то еще. Ну, то есть это были абсолютно русские, русскоязычные, но себя
прям топить таких надо было в Тысыне. Прям вот там, где плыны кача. Вот прям топить этих детей, топить.
Это не
прям
ваш
в
метод.
Тысыне. Это не ваш метод, поэтому вы интеллигентные люди, писатели, фантасты. А это наш метод. Вот прям
надо
сказал,
было.
что, так сказать, москали оккупировали, и сразу прям бросаешь в реку с бурным течением.
These bloodthirsty appeals were recorded and broadcasted on October 20th. This means that neither editors, nor managers, nor Krasovsky himself were bothered at that time by what he said. And in the course of this war, Krasovsky has become quite possibly the most bloodthirsty propagandist in Russia. In other broadcasts, he has actively called for mob bombing in Ukraine, publicly celebrated airstrikes, and gone even further. But now, his remarks about Ukrainian children have drawn scrutiny from Kiev. Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Dmitry Kuleba, said they amount to a call for genocide.
Governments which have still not banned RT must watch this excerpt. This is what you side with if you allow RT to operate in your countries. Aggressive genocide incitement, we will put this person on trial for it, which has nothing to do with freedom of speech. Ban RT worldwide.
But on October 24, 4 days after the broadcast, Krasovsky was removed from his position at RT. His boss and the head of RT, Margarita Simonyan, issued a special statement saying Anton Krasovsky's statements are savage and disgusting. The head of Russia's investigative committee said an investigation would be opened. In parliament, calls for Krasovsky's arrest had been voiced, and Krasovsky began to repent quickly.
I'm thankful to many of my comrades for their support. Genuinely grateful. Thank you so much. But this doesn't change the fact that I offended and embarrassed many of my comrades too, and my employers and my people. Please forgive me. But what's most important, it was just in very poor taste. I'm always trying to be a bit too clever, and this time it didn't work out.
Я прошу меня понять. Дурака понять.
I'm asking you to understand the stupid things I said. I'm sorry to my colleagues, to the entire team at RT, to all the mothers horrified by what came out of my mouth. I'm so sorry, and I'm going to carry this guilt in my dreams for the rest of my life.
Russia's propaganda is a machine that crushes everything in its path. When Putin began his war on February 24, every Russian television channel signed on immediately. Their task was to immerse Russian society in an Orwellian world invented by Putin, where Russia is liberating Ukrainians from Nazi rule. Lies, hatred, and calls for the destruction of Ukraine are voiced on Russia's television channels 24/7. For this reason, nothing from Krasovsky's remarks drew any notice until they hit the desk of the country's most important TV viewer. There is no doubt Krasovsky's removal was a personal Putin's order. Otherwise, the propaganda machine would never have turned itself around 180 degrees with such a surprising speed, instantly turning the accuser into the accused, a propagandist into a victim. Why did Putin react so swiftly? Obviously, because this was about children.
Граница России нигде не заканчивается.
In any totalitarian system, the cult of the leader is linked to a cult of childhood. The leader of the nation, the father of the people, must appear as the caring father of his entire flock. Stalin, surrounded by children, is one of Stalinism's most famous symbolic images. In this way, the leader with the iron fist receives a human touch. Putin and his system sense this extremely well and have already for a long time established caring for children and childhood as one of his main political trump cards. Putin personally demonstrates this constantly. His parliament passes repressive laws aimed at protecting children. In particular, this care for children is an assumed goal of one of the Kremlin's most hateful laws, the so-called Dima Yakovlev Act, prohibiting Americans from adopting Russian children. In reality, with this legislation, Putin intended to punish Washington for their passage of the Magnitsky Act. Even in the new constitution, which granted Putin with unlimited powers, there is a separate clause about kids. Children are the most important priority in Russia's government policies. But none of this professed love for children has stopped Russia from killing them in Ukraine. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Internal Affairs, in 8 months of war, 430 Ukrainian kids have been killed by Russian shelling, a rate of approximately 2 children per day. In May, Finland's President Niinistö asked Putin why Russia's military is killing Ukrainian children in Kiev, Odessa, Kharkiv, and other cities. Putin had no response.
I told Putin that he's bombing children. He had nothing to say.
In short, the Orwellian universe that Putin has built in Russia is based on hypocrisy. Putin believes that he cares for children from the very deep of his heart, and that's why he punishes Krasovsky. However, Krasovsky repented immediately, and soon his boss said he should absolutely be forgiven.
Антон попросил прощения уже много раз.
Anton has already begged for forgiveness many times. He made a video where he calls himself an idiot and explains why he said what he did, and says that he's a religious man and his religion is the single imperative, the only measure of words and deeds. A religious man who repents cannot be denied forgiveness.
So sooner rather than later, we will see Krasovsky and his hate back on Russia's propaganda front lines.
Russia tomorrow.
There are hundreds of video images from Russia's cruise missile strikes on Ukraine, showing rockets in the air and explosions on the ground, but nothing to show who fired the rockets or chose the targets. Until now. In a 6-month investigation, journalists from The Insider, Bellingcat, and Spiegel say they have located and identified 33 officers they call the remote control killers, all members of the obscure GVC computation group, all officers in Russia's military with an educational and professional background in missile programming. Phone calls between 3 groups of these officers in Russia show a distinct and repeated pattern of increased contact and communication, just as high-precision Russian cruise missiles have killed hundreds and deprived millions in Ukraine of access to electricity and heating. As Russian cruise missiles began to land across Ukraine on October 10, killing civilians and damaging infrastructure, these officers were in contact with each other and their superiors, evaluating and checking the accuracy of their targeting for Kalibr, Iskander, and K-121 cruise missiles. With more on this investigation, we now turn to journalist and executive director of Bellingcat, Christo Grozev. Christo, hello, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Christo, you claim in this investigation, you claim to have established the identities of individuals responsible for programming the missile strikes. How exactly did you do that?
Well, we went through a 6-month process of trying to find something that a lot of people were wondering, who is programming the very high precision, as the Kremlin calls them, cruise missiles that have resulted in an increasing number of civilian casualties over the last few months. We talked to many experts to try to get an idea, military experts from Russia and from abroad. Nobody seemed to know who exactly programs the flight paths. What was known is that each rocket, each missile requires individual planning because they need to go very close to the ground. They need to follow the terrain, including the latest changes to that terrain, because they cannot crash into some new newly constructed building. So it requires an almost virtual simulation of each flight path. So we started looking at the possible candidates for such a job by looking at long yearbooks of graduates of the most likely schools in Russia that produce such type of specialists. These are
that must be hundreds or even maybe thousands of names.
Well, we found thousands of names indeed that were graduates of the military Strategic Rocket Academy from Moscow. In particular, one particular institute of that academy, which is based in Serpukhov near Moscow, which creates specialists in IT technology for missiles. This is public information. We were able to find that. So we focused on people from there and some other people from the St. Petersburg Naval Engineering Institute who also are specializing in rockets, missiles, and programming them. And then among many of these people, we found an attachment, sort of an abbreviation attached to their name in many Russian phone sharing apps, such as Telegram bots like Glasboga and Chimera Search. And this was GVC, GVC, which transcribes as the Central Computational Center. And we were trying to find out more information about this center, and we only found out that it's something to do with IT for the military. We decided to get the phone records, as we usually do in such a case, for the top guy from this institute, a general called Robert Baranov. And he's a rocket specialist as well, in addition to being an IT specialist. So we found a very interesting correlation between phone calls he was getting and peaks of missile strikes on Ukraine. We found a total of more than 120 calls that were correlated to specific strikes on Ukraine. And each time he was getting a phone call from somebody lower in the chain of command who was also a rocket specialist and also an IT specialist. His name was Colonel Bagnyuk. So we had a hypothesis at this point that maybe we have found this unit that deals with planning the strikes. And then we got this person's phone records, and we found that he was communicating with about 20 different young experts, military engineers, with a focus on IT technology connected to missiles. And all of these communications were peaking at the time just before missile strikes on Ukraine. And then, well, we spent a few more months trying to identify the role of each of these people. We looked at their backgrounds.
Few more months.
Yes, I think we started at the end of April, and we only were able to publish this week. So it took 6 months to figure out the role of each of them. And then we contacted and confronted them. And one of them did not deny that that's what they do, but he refused to answer specific questions, claiming that it would not be safe for him to answer those.
They probably all of them learned from Navalny's case that when you receive phone calls like that, you better do not talk much.
Exactly. And I think after the first phone call, which was taken, or first communication was taken by one of the members of the team, all the others were already warned and they knew that we would be calling. So they had received very funny, in their view, trolling responses to whether they're part of this team. They said, no, we don't know anything about the military. I work as a bus driver, said one. The other one said, I'm a pig farmer. A third girl, who's also a member of the team, she said she's a florist. So they clearly had received such responses as legends from the FSB handlers.
So since you have revealed their names, you are positive that your conclusions are correct, and these indeed are these exact individuals who were programming these strikes.
Yes, we are sure this is based on very strong mathematics and statistical correlations, but we also gave repeatedly the chance to these people to rebut, to say that they're not doing this. And the only thing we received from some of them were lies and essentially a confirmation from one of them.
Well, let's, for example, let's take a look at the horrific missile strike on Vinnytsia in July, which took lives of 27 civilians, including a 4-year-old little girl. So you know who programmed and launched this strike.
Well, we know the team of about 9 people, one of whom did the specific programming of that strike. We don't know which of these people did it exactly. But even though some of these earlier strikes during the last 6 months were resulting in deaths of civilians, even that can sometimes be a normal part of warfare because it's called collateral damage. But in the last month, this unit started targeting or programming the missiles that target civilian infrastructure. They started targeting electrical grids, power stations, and they admitted, not they, but their bosses admitted that that's the goal. And this removes any hope that these young engineers did not know what they were doing. And this constitutes, according to United Nations investigators, war crimes. So this is why we felt braver in publishing their names after it was clear that they could not know what they're doing.
And as I understand, you also proved that these attacks on Ukraine's energetic infrastructure were prepared before actually this attack on Crimean Bridge, which was claimed as a possible trigger for these attacks.
Yes, I wouldn't say this is hard proof, but there's strong evidence to suggest that the latest attacks, which started on the 10th of October, which were the biggest since the beginning of the war, some preparation for them started already on the 2nd of October, which was several days before Putin's birthday and before the strike on the bridge. So it seems to me, but this is more an analytical hypothesis, that they were prepared as a revenge for the loss of territory by the invaders, the loss of Liman, for example, and not related to the hit on the bridge.
You are talking about participating in military crimes, and these specific individuals are also involved. To what extent do you think are they to blame? Because I assume they were following orders. They were just basically programming, and they were not pressing the button. What is their responsibility?
They're not pressing the button, but they are part of the chain of command. And in any investigation of war crimes, and I'm not saying it's war crimes, it has to be established by judges, but the evidence should be preserved for these judges. And in any investigation of potential war crimes, the whole chain of command is reviewed. And it's clear that without the role of these young people, this rocket could not have flown and killed all of these people. They were programming the flight path, they were programming the route, and therefore they knew where they would land. And therefore, they should have known that landing on, near kindergartens, without the precision that this is claimed, these rockets are claimed to have, that landing on power stations is potentially a war crime. And one important thing that we discussed with many colleagues from different media around the world over the last several months, is it fair to publish these people's names? And one of the most common answers we were receiving from editors-in-chief of large international media was, these people who are participating in the war should have exactly the same rights to anonymity, which means none, as any soldier or officer who's on the front line. Just the fact that they're working and participating in the warfare from the comfort of their offices or homes in some cases does not give them the right to anonymity. They're conscious participants in warfare, therefore they should not be anonymous.
What other practical outcomes do you see of your fascinating investigation, specifically taking into account that the attacks on Ukraine, missile attacks and shelling will most certainly continue?
Well, I hope that some of their family members who may have not known what these people are doing will have talked to them, and I hope that their neighbors might have a talk with them, and maybe some of them will decide to not continue this job because it's a job for them. They're going there on a 9-to-5 basis. They're going sometimes on night shifts, but it's a job. It pays money. They can walk away from it. And I also hope that if they don't, they're at least put on sanctions, because these same people who are during the daytime or the evening hours watching Western films, listening to music, traveling around the world.
Yes, they look like average Moscow and Petersburg sort of.
Exactly, they look like urban young people. I mean, they can't have both. They can't participate in this crazy war and at the same time hope to get a visa and travel around the world.
Thank you very much, Krista Grozev, about a fascinating investigation of the insider jointly with other outlets about a team of programmers programming missile strikes on Ukraine.
Thank you.
Russia Tomorrow.
Thank you for watching Russia Tomorrow, and thank you for subscribing to our international channel. With your financial support, we continue to broadcast the facts about Russia so that we can deliver the truth to our audience inside the country and around the world. Please help us with your cash donation to our GoFundMe page, which you can find at the link in the description below. I'm Mikhail Fishman. See you again soon.